Happy birthday, Tergar International, 15 years old. How wonderful. I think this is just extraordinary. The impact that Tergar International has had on the world is really remarkable, and how critical the organization has been for bringing Mingyur Rinpoche in contact with so many beings. It's just extraordinary. It's interesting when I think back to those early years of the formative days of Tergar International. My roles were quite diverse. I was an audio engineer, a poorly trained and underqualified audio engineer. I would manage retreats. I would do a bit of sewing. I would cook food. I would schlep items back and forth out in Minnesota in those early years. I would coordinate with the local monastery in Bodh Gaya, of course, with Cortland and Edwin and Tim and Mioshin. Those early years were just so critical for the formation of the organization and so critical for my own spiritual formation. I've heard Mingyur Rinpoche mention that it's those people who were around in those early years who really laid the foundation for what was to come. And it's just a privilege to have been part of that. Not that I necessarily laid much of that foundation, but I was along for the ride. And when I reflect back on those early days, the retreats, for example, at St. John's out in Minnesota, that just majestic landscape was so appropriate for Tergar International to land in North America. Working with the wonderful Ani Miaolin and then Franca, organizing those programs, right? And, you're reflecting back, it's like everything was emergent and everything was new. So, we get out there and we see the space that we're going to use, and all of a sudden we think, oh, geez, we need a shrine. Okay, well, what does that shrine look like? How can we manufacture it? And so we piecemealed together, Ani Miaolin, myself, Tim, we piecemealed together some type of, structure that could hold the shrine. And it was so sweet to go back each year after those first couple of years and see that in many instances nothing really changed. That shrine stayed pretty similar over the years, and it was just intended to be a makeshift placeholder at first, but yet we set precedent, and the tradition begins. And I'd also, mention, the ambiance of the organization, the ethos of the organization at that point was so nurturing. I was a relatively new practitioner, right? Been practicing for maybe 5 years by the time I met Mingyur Rinpoche. But in other Dharma organizations, I didn't get that sense. I got the sense that everything was established and I needed to somehow mold myself to fit into what was happening. Versus with Tergar International and Mingyur Rinpoche right at the lead, he was empowering to us as practitioners and as volunteers and eventually as employees to adapt things to meet our needs, right? And this is such an invitation. I mean, rarely do you get a visionary with the magnitude and the profundity of Mingyur Rinpoche who's willing to listen. And he was. And that trickled down. I always felt, no matter what table I was at, whether it was with the original instructors, Rinpoche himself, other boards of directors or organizing committees, I always felt that if I voiced my perspective, it was heard. And so it was deeply empowering for me. And it's kept me around, to be honest. When I think about choices that I've made in my life, Tergar and Mingyur Rinpoche have always been right at the center. And I think those formative years are what helped to facilitate that. The friendships that were made, the bonds that were made, and maybe most importantly, how included I felt. So I have nothing but thanks for the organization and for Mingyur Rinpoche. It's been life transformative and led to really everything I've done ever since I met him in 2006, I guess it was. Ever since that date, my life has been oriented towards helping him fulfill his mission. And I'm so appreciative to be along for the ride. So once again, happy birthday, Tergar International. Pleasure to be a part of this, and wish everyone well.